Hello, everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about death and dying and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's contribution to our understanding of the stages of grief and what people actually go through when they're coping with a loss. Um, so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was very revolutionary, and she was not a psychologist. She was actually a physician, and she was really controversial at her time. Her first book on death and dying was written in 1969, and people at this time did not want to talk, and I guess we still don't necessarily want to talk about death, and we're very avoidant of the topic. But she actually helped develop hospice and really understand an understanding of the process of death and dying and how we can improve that process for people. She was actually a medical doctor. She was not a psychologist. And during her residency, when she was learning to be a doctor, she noticed that the dying were kind of isolated and neglected and off at a particular wing in the hospital. And the family members were sort of avoided because people didn't know what to say or what to do. And she really wanted to work to change that, to make dying a more positive experience, especially for family members and also for the person that's actually dying as well. And she did say that her stages of grief apply to the person who's dying as well as the family members of that person that's dying as well. So she came up with 5 different stages of grief. And that first stage is anger and guilt. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my loved one? The second stage is denial and shock. This can't be right. This can't possibly be true. The third one is bargaining. You start to bargain with God. If I have this much more time, I will do this for you. Just give me a little bit of time to get through the wedding, get to the birth of my grandson, whatever it is that the person would like to get through. And then once you get through that bargaining phase and you sort of accept that this is happening, you start to feel pretty sad about it and pretty depressed about it. And many people can go through these stages fairly quickly. Some people will get stuck at a particular stage, and some people will fall back into earlier stages. So you can kind of go through sadness and depression and yet still fall back to anger and anger about what's happening too. And then the final stage is actually acceptance. And what she said is that you have to get through all 5 of these stages in order to fully accept the loss. Doesn't mean that you won't fall back, and you don't have to necessarily go through these stages in this particular order. But obviously, definitely the family and the person who's dying goes through these stages too. And people don't always move smoothly through these stages. They're not necessarily experienced in order. But I guess one of the things that she did was make it okay for people to be angry when somebody they love is dying, or angry themselves because they're dying and they're not ready to go. And it's really common for people to be in denial when they're first told something. It's really hard to take something horrible like that in, especially if it's a young child. If it's an older person, we know they're not going to live forever, so we're less in denial and shock. And it really has a lot to do with the situation. If you had a friend that was killed by a drunk driver, well, you might get stuck in that anger stage for a longer time. If you're a parent of a child that was killed by a drunk driver, you might have a lot of trouble getting through that anger stage. And you certainly might go through the denial and shock stage. And then eventually, hopefully, you'll get to acceptance. But some people get stuck in that anger stage, and it's hard to blame them. And yet, you have to realize that the more you hold on to that anger and those negative feelings, the worse you feel. So there are the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the MAD organization that try to take that energy and that anger and put it into changing legislation, preventing this from happening to other people. So try to make it into more of a positive, and that's a much better way to go than to just be angry and bitter for the rest of your life. But many people do, and you can't blame them, but is it, are they shortchanging themselves by doing that? Um, but she definitely said the stages have to be completed to fully accept and cope with the loss. And she also said that these stages of grief can apply to lots of different kinds of losses. If you lose a job and you really loved that job, if you're going through a divorce or a relationship breakup, if you got into a car accident and now have a physical disability, that's a loss that you have to cope with and deal with, and you probably will go through all of these stages. Having a child that's disabled, have a business failure. Um, all sorts of terrible losses that people can have, you still do go through those stages of grief. And really, what she wanted to do was just highlight the different feelings that people have and sort of, oh, make it okay for people to have those feelings and talk about those feelings and not be afraid of death or afraid of talking about death, because that makes you feel worse in the long run. So I think she really contributed a lot to our understanding of how to deal with death. That's it.